Sandra, for more on this now, let's bring in Morgan Ortagus. She's the former State Department spokesperson in the Trump administration. So this morning, after that conversation with Rashida Tlaib yesterday on the tarmac, President Biden called Netanyahu, said that he expected a, quote, significant de-escalation of the situation there on the path to a ceasefire. Netanyahu came out today to say that he is determined to continue the retaliation against Hamas, the degrading of their capabilities there. The top advisor to Bibi Netanyahu, Mark Regev, Morgan, saying that a premature cessation of violence would play into Hamas's hands. Typically, as we've seen in the past, Israel continues these operations until it achieves its strategic objectives.
Yeah, it's odd that you see the President of the United States asking our greatest ally in the world, and certainly one of our greatest allies in the Middle East, to have a ceasefire with a terrorist organization that continues to attack them. Listen, from a military perspective, Israel right now is fundamentally degrading the leadership of Hamas and PIJ, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. These are two terrorist groups located there. And so I suspect as long as Israel is having a fantastic targeting game in terms of taking out the leaders of these terrorist groups, they're going to continue this effort, as any country would do if there was a terrorist entity that was sending long-range rockets to harm their civilians. So I certainly don't blame Netanyahu there. I see, John, just a greater struggle within the Democratic Party. You've seen Nancy Pelosi, for example, who had very strong statements. You've actually, to give them credit, you've seen the Biden administration still stand up for Israel at the UN. So they have done some things that I agree with. But unfortunately, what you may be happening is that the president may be caving to the loudest voices in his party. Now, if we look at this from a geopolitical perspective, what these people like Rashida Tlaib and AOC and others are talking about doing is fundamentally changing our allies, our alliances in the Middle East. They've instituted and are putting through legislation to stop weaponry sales to Israel during the middle of a war right now. I'm not sure that that's going to gain any steam in the Congress, but we can't underscore, I can underscore how radical this position is. All of the talk in the campaign about restoring, quote unquote, restoring American alliances and giving faith and goodwill to our allies again, which I don't even think was needed, but that's fine. That's what the campaign said that they were going to do. The actions that the loudest members of the Democrat Party are talking about right now are radical, they are extreme, and they would fundamentally alter our relationships with our allies in the Middle East. And if this is how the president and his party are going to behave, Americans need to take a really strong look at what they're doing with Israel and Russia and elsewhere around the world. These actions, these words have serious consequences, John.
We should also point out, Morgan, that earlier in the day, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Mark Pocan, and Rashida Tlaib led the introduction of a House resolution opposing the sale of $735 million of American-made weapons to the Israeli government. Let's switch gears. Talk about the Nord Stream 2 pipeline that goes between Russia and the northeastern part of Germany. Yesterday, the Biden administration made it known that it would waive sanctions against a Putin crony who is in charge of the company that's building that pipeline. And when I read that news, all I could think to myself was, what if President Trump had done something like that?
Yeah, I think President Biden is taking the opposite of Roosevelt's advice. This administration, as it relates to Russia, seems to talk boldly but carry a twig. And unfortunately, Putin knows this game. I mean, listen, there's some very troubling things. Maybe there's a connection, maybe there's not. But we saw the cancellation of the pipeline, the Keystone Pipeline here in the United States. Then we saw the hacking by Russian actors. Putin claims that he didn't know what was going on, but give me a break. So then we see the hacking of an American pipeline that takes our energy, infrastructure and creates problems with our oil supply for 2 weeks, right? So you see all this happen, and then the company reportedly pays a $5 million ransom to the Russians, and then all of a sudden, out of the blue, we have we're not going to enforce sanctions against the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. I mean, this is incredibly bizarre behavior. It is the opposite of being tough on Russia. It is a major concession, and by the way, the German people aren't necessarily for this. The tide is turning on German public opinion as it relates to Nord Stream 2. And finally, I would just add, so much for climate change. Russia is the worst polluter and makes no commitments. So a lot of fluff.
Yeah, definitely there are a lot of things that don't quite add up there. Morgan Ortagus, good to see you there from Nashville.